The night my daughter-in-law told me I had two choices: become the family babysitter or find somewhere else to live. I didn't say a word. I stood there in the kitchen, still holding the dish towel I'd been using to dry the dinner plates, and I looked at her for a long moment. Then I folded the towel, set it on the counter, and said goodnight. She probably thought she'd won. She hadn't. My name is Warren. I'm 61 years old, and I spent 34 years teaching high school history in Barrie, Ontario. My wife, Susan, passed away 2 years before all of this happened. Breast cancer, quick and brutal, the way it usually is when it comes back the second time. We'd been married for 32 years. She was the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday, kept a spare set of keys for 3 of our neighbors, and still found the energy to make Sunday dinner after a full week of work. When she died, the house got very quiet. My son, Adrian, called me 3 weeks after the funeral. He and his wife, Chloe, had been living in Mississauga for 4 years at that point, a nice semi-detached on a quiet crescent, 2 kids under 5, both of them working full-time. Adrian had a project management job at a logistics firm. Chloe did something in financial marketing that I never fully understood but paid well. Adrian said they missed me. Said the kids, my grandkids, Theo and Lily, were asking about Grandpa. Said the drive from Barrie was getting long. Then he said the thing he'd been working up to. They had a spare room. I didn't have to decide anything that night. Just think about it. I thought about it for 6 weeks. I walked through the house Susan and I had shared for 23 years. I sat in her chair. I made coffee in the morning and drank it alone. Some mornings I was fine. Some mornings I'd open the fridge and see the brand of jam she always bought, and I'd have to sit down on the kitchen floor for a while. I told myself I was being practical. The house was too big. The maintenance costs were climbing. Susan had been the one who knew which contractor to call and which neighbor plowed whose driveway. I told myself being close to family made sense. I told myself a lot of things. I sold the house in March for just under $800,000. After the mortgage payoff and fees, I walked away with a little over $600,000 in my pocket. I moved into Adrian and Chloe's spare room with 2 suitcases and my wife's old reading lamp, which still had a small chip in the base from when we'd moved it the first time 20 years ago. I left the rest in storage because the room was small and I didn't want to crowd their space. I wanted to be easy to have around. I wanted them to never regret asking me. That was my first mistake. The second bedroom at the end of the hall wasn't really a spare room. It was technically a home office that Chloe had converted by pushing a pull-out couch against one wall and clearing half the shelving. The closet still had boxes in it. There was no overhead light, just the desk lamp I'd brought and a floor lamp they moved in from the hallway. It was fine. It was more than fine. I didn't need much. I'd spent 3 years at the end of Susan's illness sleeping in a recliner in the hospital and calling that rest. A pull-out couch in Mississauga felt like a hotel. The first 2 weeks were good. I took Theo to school every morning. He was 4, junior kindergarten at the public school 8 minutes away. I picked him up at 3. I watched Lily in the afternoons while Chloe worked from home upstairs. We went to the park on Confederation Drive, looked at geese, threw bread crusts into the pond, came home and watched Too Much Bluey. Adrian would come home at 6. Chloe would finish her calls by 6:30. We'd all eat together. I felt useful. I felt like I was contributing. Then slowly, things shifted. It started small, the way it always does. Chloe started leaving a grocery list on the kitchen counter in the morning. Not asking, just leaving it there, with the reusable bags folded underneath, as if we'd agreed to something. I did the groceries. I didn't say anything because I was already taking their car to school anyway, and it made sense to stop at Loblaws on the way home. Then Adrian mentioned, offhandedly, that Lily's daycare had been canceled on Thursdays because of a staffing shortage. Could I manage? Just for a while. I said of course. Thursdays became all week. The daycare spot quietly disappeared. I was never asked if that was okay. I just noticed one day that I'd been watching Lily 5 days a week for 3 months, and she had never gone back. I started cooking dinner. That happened because I was home and it seemed natural. Susan had taught me to cook. She hadn't let either of us not know how. I made roast chicken and wild rice. I made a proper beef stew with the dark ale and the pearl onions, the way her mother used to make it. One evening, Adrian looked up from his bowl and said, "Dad, honestly, this is restaurant quality." I was pleased. I was proud. By autumn, dinner every night was assumed. Chloe's mother visited in November, Vivian. I'd met her twice before at family events, a composed, careful woman from Oakville who wore cream-colored cardigans, and never quite asked direct questions. She stayed for 4 days and I cooked every meal of her visit. Chloe didn't introduce me to Vivian's friends when they came over for coffee on the Saturday afternoon. I was in the kitchen. I heard them arrive. No one came to the kitchen. That was the first time something small lodged in my chest like a splinter. Winter was harder. The house ran on a schedule that didn't include me, except where I was needed. I'd be halfway through reading in my room, the room with no overhead light, and Chloe would knock to say she had a call at 9, and could I get Lily down before then? Sometimes it was 7:30 and I hadn't eaten yet. I said yes every time. I don't know why I kept saying yes when I had already started saying no inside my own head. I want to explain something about that feeling, the one where you keep being useful, because being useful feels safer than being a burden. I'd spent 34 years as a teacher. I knew how to hold a room, how to make people feel heard, how to have a hard conversation across a desk. But in that house, I became very small. I'm not sure exactly when it happened. I think it happened the way rust happens, slowly, everywhere, and then all at once. February. That's when Adrian handed me an envelope with a bill inside. It was from the daycare, a new spot they'd found for Lily, starting in March. He said they'd decided to give her a more structured environment. I said that sounded good. I said I'd enjoyed the time with her. He said, also, there's the matter of expenses. I waited. He explained that since I was living there, they'd been carrying some additional household costs. He had a number, he'd actually written it down, of $850 a month for my share. He said it covered groceries, utilities, and my use of the car. I held the envelope. I thought about the $1,200 in groceries I bought every month at Loblaws. I thought about the dinners I cooked. I thought about the 14 months I'd spent getting his children to and from school, and putting them to bed and reading them the same 3 library books until I had them memorized. I said I'd think about it. He said, "It's only fair, Dad." I went to my room. I sat on the edge of the pull-out couch with its thin mattress and its frame that creaked every time I shifted my weight, and I stared at my wife's reading lamp on the desk, the chip in the base. I thought about what she would say to me right now. She'd been the direct one. She'd have already had this conversation months ago, kindly and clearly in that way she had. I had not inherited her clarity. I'd inherited her stubbornness, which is a different thing. I didn't pay the $850. I didn't say I wouldn't. I just didn't. 2 weeks went by. Then Chloe brought it up at dinner. She framed it gently. She had a gift for framing things gently, but the meaning was plain. They couldn't continue to absorb the costs. If I wasn't going to contribute financially, maybe we needed to talk about whether this arrangement was working. I asked what not working meant. She said it would make more sense for them to rent the room to someone who could contribute consistently. I asked, "Contribute the way I've been contributing, or just financially?" She looked at Adrian. Adrian looked at his plate. I said, "I want to be clear about something. I've been your children's primary caregiver for 14 months. I have not charged you anything for that. I cook dinner every night. I do not charge you for that either. The groceries I buy each month cost more than what you're asking me to pay. I am not complaining about any of it, but I want to make sure we're having an honest conversation about what I contribute here." Chloe said, very evenly, that she appreciated everything I did, but this was their home, and they needed to be able to manage it in a way that worked for the whole family. I said I understood completely, and then, in a voice I barely recognized because it was so calm, I said, "I'll be out by the end of the month." Chloe said, "Warren, we're not asking you to leave." "I know," I said. "I'm telling you I'm going." I slept well that night, better than I had in months. I'm not sure I'd expected that. I called my old colleague Derek the next morning. We'd taught side by side for 11 years. He'd retired before me, sharp man, knew everyone in Barrie and Aurelia. He knew a woman named Helen who managed a seniors building in Collingwood with a long wait list, but he also knew about a newer apartment complex in Barrie, the kind they build for people 55 and over, with a common room and a garden terrace, and organized walking groups on Tuesday mornings. Private, independent, yours entirely. I drove up to see a unit on a Thursday while Theo was at school and Chloe was on a call. The apartment was on the 3rd floor, large windows facing east, a kitchen with enough counter space to cook a proper meal, a separate bedroom with an actual closet. I stood at the window and looked at the February light on the snow outside, and I thought, yes, this. I signed the lease that afternoon. I didn't tell Adrian and Chloe right away. I came home, made dinner, helped Theo with his spelling homework, read Lily her books. I did everything exactly the way I always did. I was not cold. I was not different. I was just finished. I had movers booked for the 14th. A week before I mentioned it to Adrian, when Chloe was putting the kids to bed, I told him I'd found a place in Barrie. Told him I was leaving on the 14th. Told him I thought it was best for everyone. He went very quiet. He said, "Dad, I didn't mean." I said, "I know what you meant, son. It's okay." He said, "What about the kids? Lily's new daycare doesn't start until March." I said, "I'll be here until the 14th. That's 3 weeks. I'm sure you'll figure it out." He started to say something else. I said I was tired and I was going to bed. The movers came at 8 in the morning. Two men from a company Adrian had never heard of. I'd found them online, paid the deposit from my own account, handled the whole thing myself. They were efficient and quiet, and they had the pull-out couch and my suitcases and Susan's lamp in the truck within 40 minutes. I wasn't taking much. I didn't need much. The rest was still in storage where it had been for 14 months, waiting. Chloe came downstairs when she heard the truck. She was in her housecoat. She looked at the boxes. She looked at me. She said, "Warren, it really didn't have to be like this." I said, "You're right, it didn't." I hugged Theo, who was confused about the truck. I hugged Lily, who wasn't old enough to understand, and kept saying my name while I held her. That part was hard. I won't pretend otherwise. I kissed the top of her head and I handed her to her mother. I drove north on the 400 following the moving truck. And about 20 minutes out of Mississauga, the tension in my shoulders began to ease in a way I hadn't felt in over a year. The February sky was the color of old iron, but the road was clear. I turned on CBC radio. They were playing classical, something gentle and unhurried. I let it run. My building had a maintenance man named Rob who showed me where everything was and helped me figure out the thermostat, which was a newer kind I hadn't seen before. The movers had everything up in under 2 hours. I thanked them and tipped them, and stood alone in the apartment for a while after they left. I put Susan's lamp on the table by the window, still chipped, still exactly right. I unpacked slowly over the next 3 days. I found things in my storage unit I had forgotten. The good cast iron pan we'd had since our first apartment in Thunder Bay, a small wooden clock from Susan's parents' house, books I'd been meaning to reread for a decade. I made myself a proper meal the first night. Chicken thighs with herbs, roasted vegetables, a glass of red wine I'd been saving. I sat at my own table and ate it slowly, and listened to the building settle around me. The Tuesday morning walking group met in the lobby at 9, 6 people, ranging from early 60s to late 70s. A retired pharmacist named Miles, who knew more about Ontario birds than anyone I'd ever met. A woman named Patricia. No, not that Patricia. My Patricia was already gone. This one I'll call Helen, because that's her name, and she was a former school principal from Midland who had opinions about everything, and delivered them with great warmth and zero apology. We walked for an hour along the trail by the water. Miles pointed out a merlin sitting on a hydro wire. I hadn't thought about birds much. I started thinking about birds. I was 3 weeks into my new life when Adrian called, then again, then Chloe. I didn't answer the first few, not out of spite. I was genuinely busy, which surprised me. I had a library card to get, and a new GP to register with, and I'd signed up for a furniture restoration class at the community center on Thursday evenings, because I'd always wanted to know how to do that, and had never made time. I called Derek. I drove to see my sister Lorraine in Penetanguishene for the weekend. I was, for the first time in 14 months, living at my own pace. By the end of the 3rd week, there were 27 missed calls between the two of them. I called Adrian back on a Sunday evening. He said the new daycare had had a problem with their licensing, and Lily's spot had been pushed back another 6 weeks. He said the agency they'd called for a sitter had quoted them $32 an hour. He said things were complicated. He said he was sorry for how the conversation had gone in February. I said I appreciated that. He asked if I'd consider coming back, just temporarily, until they sorted out the childcare situation. I said no, not unkindly, just no. He was quiet for a while. I let him be quiet. Then he said, "I didn't think you'd actually leave." And I said, "I know. That's the part I think about." He called again 3 days later to say he was sorry for real this time. Not the sorry that comes with a request attached, but a slower, quieter one. He said he thought about what I'd said at that dinner table, about what I'd contributed, and he said he'd never added it up before, and he had now, and he felt ashamed. I told him shame was only useful if you did something with it. He said he was trying. I believe him. Adrian is not a bad person. He's a person who got comfortable, and comfort has a way of making people stop seeing what's in front of them. I was comfortable too, in my own way. I was comfortable being invisible, because invisibility felt like belonging. I was wrong about that. Chloe texted me in April. Long message, careful, the way she always is. She said she knew she had a tendency to manage situations instead of addressing them, and that she'd managed me instead of talking to me, and that she was sorry. She said the kids missed me. I wrote back and said I'd come for a visit in May if that worked for them. She said yes immediately. I went in May, drove down on a Saturday, brought a coffee cake from the bakery I found near my apartment. Theo showed me a Lego set he'd been building. Lily ran at me from across the hallway and hit me in the knees and called my name so loudly the neighbor's dog barked. I sat on their living room floor and helped build a castle for 2 hours while Adrian made lunch, which was the first time I had ever seen Adrian make lunch in that house. It wasn't everything repaired at once. Things don't work that way. But it was something. A door left open. I drove home in the early evening, with the windows down and the radio on, north on the 400, the same way I'd gone in February, same highway, different feeling. The light was long and golden, and the trees had come out. Miles had told me what to look for along the Barry waterfront when the warblers started coming through in spring. I hadn't learned their songs yet, but I was working on it. I thought about something my wife Susan used to say. Not often, just when it mattered. She'd say, "The moment you stop shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's space is the moment you find out how much room you actually needed." She was right about most things. She was right about that too.